Okay, so for today, we will be discussing non-accusatory and accusatory interviews. So basically, may background na rin kayo dito. Pag non-accusatory, mas kilala natin ito na interviews. And then, kapag accusatory, we are already doing interrogation. So ano-ano yung mga bagay na we should also put into consideration, ano yung mga ah, paalala o mga factors na puwedeng makatulong sa atin para makapag-decide kung yung taong ini-interrogate ba natin ay, "Etong taong 'to niloloko na lang ako nito, binobola na lang ako nito." Para masabi natin 'yon. Okay, dito muna tayo sa non-accusatory interviews. So most interviews conducted by investigators will be non-accusatory in nature. The investigator uses these interviews to establish as much information as possible about the event under investigation. Even when a suspect has been identified and an interrogation is planned, the investigator will interview the suspect prior to the interrogation. Kasi kukuha ka muna rin ng facts o ng mga details mula doon sa ini-interrogate mo. Kaya ang dating, by nature, interview pa muna, hindi naman kaagad-agad, "O, umamin ka na. Alam namin ang ginawa mo, umamin ka na sa krimen na ginawa mo." Hindi naman siya kaagad gano'n. Kaya nga non-accusatory, nagtatanong ka lang muna, nag-i-interview ka lang talaga. Sa first part, kung maalala din ninyo yung read technique, 'di ba? Yun yung una, mag-interview ka muna. This pre-interview may occur on the telephone, in person, immediately prior to the interrogation, or as a witness interview early in the investigation. Okay, so how do we conduct interviews for witnesses? Interviews conducted with witnesses should be non-accusatory. Investigators must make a systematic effort to interview all witnesses so that a thorough investigation is completed. So habang nasa crime scene ka pa, kung ikaw yung investigator on case, hanap ka na ng mga taong posibleng maging witness doon. Kumuha ka ng statements nila, mga kapitbahay, yung mga tsismosa doon sa kanto ninyo, yung mga tambay doon sa lugar na yon, pwede mong kuhanan ng mga information. Maaari kasi na kahit na nasa bahay lang sila, hindi nila nakita yung krimen, baka may narinig sila. So yun, kailangan mag-canvas ka nga doon sa area ng incident para mas madami kang interviews na makonduct. Mas madami kang detalye at mga impormasyon na makukuha mula sa kanila. Some witnesses to a crime may eventually become suspects, but they should not be treated as such until the investigator feels that there is adequate evidence to infer this and is prepared to proceed with an interrogation. So, kailangan tatanungin mo lang muna siya. Magkakanta ka muna ng non-accusatory interview dahil hindi mo pa naman sure. Hindi mo pa sure kung siya talaga ang gumawa ng krimen. And baka hindi mo pa nare-realize at that point. Kaya nga ang sabi dyan, they may eventually become suspects. Ibig sabihin, kalaunan na lang, hindi nung unang part. During a witness interview, the investigator should ask open-ended questions. Ibig sabihin ng open-ended questions, these are not answerable by yes or no. Kumain ka na ba? Is that an open-ended question? Hindi. Kasi, opo, kumain na ako. O di answerable by yes or no. Hindi pa po. Di pa po ako kumain. Eh kung ang tanong mo, bakit ka pa kumakain? O di may sagot yun. Okay. If a witness answers are too short or lack description, the investigator should ask follow-up questions to elicit further detail. The questions asked of witnesses will vary depending on the investigation. In general, the witness should be asked to describe what they observed in as much detail as possible. Lahat ng nakita niya, lahat ng napansin niya doon sa crime scene or doon sa krimen, kung na-witness niya talaga, ay hingin mo sa kanya what involvement in any they had in the event, their knowledge of or relationship with any of the participants, kung ano yung alam nila tungkol doon sa mga involved doon sa krimen, yung biktima, yung suspect. Ano yung mga personal information ng mga participants. Baka alam nila yung number, baka alam nila yung Facebook. Yan, name, age, phone number, address. Next are victim interviews. When interviewing a victim, the investigator must keep in mind that the person they are speaking with has just been through a bad experience. Always remember, kapag nagkakanda kayo ng interview sa victim, maging sensitive tayo. Kasi, yun na nga, may naranasan siyang hindi maganda. Baka traumatized pa siya nung pagkakataon na yun o wala pa siya sa wisyo niya. The victim's health and personal safety must be the investigator's primary concern. Hindi pwedeng dumadanak na yung dugo, pinagtatanong mo pa siya, madam, kailangan na po kasi namin mag-imbestiga, pwede po ba kayong matanong? Tapos, hindi pwedeng ganon, na. This may cause the interview with the victim to be postponed. The victim may be angry, afraid, or even traumatized. These intense emotions may be projected onto the investigator. Baka hindi ka rin makakuha ng magagandang sagot o maaayos na sagot dahil nga galit siya. Baka puro paninisi lang doon sa suspect yung pagsasabihin niya. So, yun na nga, walang makukuhang magandang detalye o magandang information wala doon. The investigator will have to use all of his or her communication skills to obtain the valuable information that the victim possesses. The victim should be asked to provide a description of what happened to them in as much detail as possible. Siyempre, siya ang pinaka eyewitness sa nangyari kasi siya nga ang biktima. Mas maipapaliwanag niya rin yung sarili niya kapag kalmado na siya, kapag medyo move on na siya doon sa pangyayari. Hindi naman totally move on ha. Yun na nga, nakalma na siya. Pwede na siyang makapagsalita at makapagbigay ng impormasyon ng maayos. Okay. The investigator should ask follow-up questions to clarify points in the victim's statements. The victim should be asked if they know the persons involved in the incident and what, if any, is their relationship to them. Paano sila nagkakilala? Anong relasyon nila sa isa't isa? Magkapitbahay ba sila? O hindi talaga nila kilala yung isa't isa, yung suspect at yung victim? So, tatanungin mo yon. In cases involving property crime, the investigator should establish in detail what was taken or damaged. Kinuha po yung 65 inches TV namin na flat screen. Big time. Yun, i-detail, kukunin mo yung mga detalye ng mga ninakaw. The investigator should obtain the victim's personal information, homework, cell phone, and email niya to facilitate follow-up conversations. Maaari kasi, nung nakausap mo siya, may hindi ka na itanong bilang investigador. At kaya mahalaga na makuha mo yung mga contact details niya para kung may maalala kang dapat mong maitanong sa kanya or meron kang napag-alaman base dun sa mga ebidensya na maaaring yung victim alam niya yung sagot. Yun, madali mo siyang makakausap. Okay. Kapag sexual harassment interviews naman, these investigators will be handled almost exclusively by non-law enforcement investigators. But here in the Philippines, kumakausap sa kanila ay yung mga nasa WCPD, Women and Children's Protection Desk. Sila yung nakakausap sa kanila. And I just remembered, yung blotter nila ay hindi nilalagay dun sa usual na blotter book. Kung nakakita na kayo ng blotter book sa police station, yung malaking naka-hardbound tapos siguro kalahati ng table na to. Ganun ang size niya. Or hindi naman kalahati. Siguro mga 2/5 ng table na to. Ganun siya kalaki. Separate kapag ganyan ang mga case, sexual harassment, rape, binugbog ng asawa, yan, pag involve ang babae at bata, separate ang blotter book nila, kulay pink. Yan. And then, saan ako? The obvious exception being internal affairs in inquiries within police departments. Complaints that are handled quickly and efficiently by employers are less likely to result in litigation. Siyempre, kung naayos niya na internally, magiging mabilis na lang ang pag-process niya sa kaso at hindi na rin aabot pa sa korte. Men and women can be victims of sexual harassment. A minimum of 2 interviews should be conducted in a sexual harassment investigation, one with the victim and one with the accused. Additional witnesses should also be interviewed kung meron. Since these investigations often involve one employee's word against another, the victim should be told that his or her complaint is being taken seriously and that it will be investigated fully. Pag mga sexual harassment cases or rape cases, kadalasan talaga walang ibang witness maliban doon sa biktima. So, bihira yung pagkakataon na merong witness na actual na ginagawa yung krimen. Uh, the investigator should not make any promises of confidentiality to the victim. When interviewing the alleged perpetrator, the investigator should explain the purpose of the interview, the allegations, and the identity of the victim. Basic naman yan, di ba? Sasabihin mo doon sa suspect kung ano yung mga maaaring ipataw na kaso sa kanya. Sasabihin mo lahat yon. And then, the investigator should also explain to the perpetrator that no decision has been made on the truthfulness of the allegation. Maaari kasi na hindi totoo yung sinasabi ng victim. Yan ang problem sa sexual harassment or rape cases. It's really his word against hers. Kasi nga walang ibang witness. Kaya medyo mahirap siyang patunayan. Tsaka madali ang depensa kasi dyan eh. May consent naman, sir. Girlfriend ko naman siya. Kaya normal lang po na ginagawa namin yun. Yun ang depensa. Okay. At the conclusion of the interviews, the investigator should consider the credibility of the victim, perpetrator, and witnesses. The facts should be evaluated from the perspective of a reasonable person. The investigator should distinguish between unwelcome and voluntary sexual conduct. The finished report should then be submitted with recommendations to the person or committee with the authority to decide what action, if any, will be taken by the employer. So this is when there are sexual harassment in the workplace. But same concept kapag ina-apply natin ito sa law enforcement. So depending on the personal preference of the situation, interviewers will choose to use the interview style that is most comfortable. Regardless of the style chosen, the goal of the interrogation is the same: to obtain a confession legally and ethically that will stand up to scrutiny in court. To accomplish this, interviewers will use many of the same tools despite their different choices or combinations of interview styles. So, etong binanggit natin is yung accusatory na. Kanina kasi non-accusatory. So, we are already conducting the interrogation sa part na to. So, first, kailangan mo ng rapport. Madaming beses na natin itong napag-usapan. Developing rapport with a subject early in the interview can be very valuable to ultimately obtaining a confession. Yung medyo parang close na kayo. Nakapag-build ka na ng rapport. Kumbaga, hindi na kayo stranger sa isa't isa. Spending time with the subject discussing non-threatening topics will put the person at ease. The questions asked by the interviewer during the rapport building process should not be personal. These questions can be as simple as verifying their address, phone number, the spelling of a name, or work history. For interviewers who prefer to evaluate behavioral and physiological responses to questions, The rapport building process allows them to establish the subject's normal responses to question. Kung maalala ninyo, nabanggit din natin, kailangan mag-observe muna ang interrogator kung ano yung normal na kilos ng isang ini-interrogate niya. Para masabi niya, matukoy niya kung alin yung hindi na normal habang ini-interrogate yun. This makes evaluating truthful and deceptive responses later in the interview easier. A common occurrence in normal conversations is mirroring. Ginagaya mo yung ginagawa nung in-interrogate. Both parties will mimic the posture, gestures, and mannerisms of the other. That's one technique. When building rapport, the interviewer can mimic the posture and gestures of the subject. Kunyari, gumanon yung subject. Gaganon ka din bilang interrogator. Once the interviewer feels that rapport has been established, he or she should move slightly. If the subject mirrors this movement, rapport has been established. So kapag sa una, gagayahin mo yung ini-interrogate. Tapos sa susunod, ikaw naman ang kikilos at kapag ginaya naman na yon nung ini-interrogate, then you have already built rapport. Signs of deception. Sir, there is no guaranteed way to determine if a subject is lying. There are no typical nonverbal behaviors that are associated with deception. Not all liars display the same behavior in the same situation. Sabi nga natin, paulit-ulit na ang bawat tao ay individual, kaya magkakaiba din ang kanilang mga kilos. Not all liars display the same behavior in the same situation. Additionally, behaviors will differ across deceptive situations. The investigative interviewer has to rely on his or her experience and instincts to make that determination. Changes in behavior in response to questions should be noted. If the interviewer has taken the time to establish rapport with the subject, deceptive responses may be more obvious. Any one word or behavior on its own should not be considered an indicator of dishonesty. However, if the behavior is linked to a question about the subject's involvement in the investigation, there is a good chance that the behavior is an indicator of dishonesty. Behaviors should be consistent when the question is repeated, and deceptive signals typically occur in clusters. Okay. So, hindi mo nga direktang matutukoy kung deceptive ba ang kilos ng isang tao. Dahil magkakaiba ang kilos ng bawat tao. Pero, ito yung mga behavior that may indicate dishonesty. Pero nabanggit din natin dati na hindi sure ang mga to. So, what you could do as an investigator, check mo lang itong mga to. Observe mo lang doon sa ini-interrogate mo. At i-compare mo doon sa tinatawag nating baseline na yung normal response niya. Kapag nag-iba, then siguro i-check mo, i-counter check mo yung part na kung ano yung sinabi niya doon, ano yung tinanong mo doon. Kapag naging naramdaman niyang uneasy siya o uncomfortable siya, check mo yun. Baka may ibang detalye pa doon na dapat mong i-follow up. Remember, itong mga to, hindi sila admissible as evidence. Your Honor, kasi po, nag-cross-leg siya nung tinanong ko po kung siya po yung pumatay sa biktima. Hindi yun admissible as evidence. Baka katulong lang ito during your interrogation process or interview process para mas madami ka pang detalye. Kumbaga, meron kang cue kung saan ka magtatanong pa o magbo-bombard pa ng questions. Aling part ng questioning mo. So, i-check mo daw yung posture. Slumping over or leaning back in the chair. Nakaganyan ba siya? O nag-slump na siya. Sitting in a way that protects the abdomen. Shifting positions in the chair. The hand and arms, check mo rin. Placing the hand over the mouth to muffle words or hide expressions. Nakaganito. Arms crossed and the thumbs extended. Check mo rin yung legs. Sa legs and feet naman, ang i-check mo yung movement nito. Sa Tagalog, nagkukuyakoy ba? Yung nagsishake yung paa. Legs crossed with the knee raised to protect the abdomen. Nakaakyat yung paa. Tapos nakayakap siyang gano'n. Sa head and neck naman, check mo kung, sorry, legs crossed with arms holding the leg in place as a barrier. And then sa head and neck, check mo, head down can indicate a negative attitude or submission kapag nakayuko na. Head back, looking down on the nose, nakaganyan siya. And then head nodding and head shaking, umiiling. Check mo lahat yon. Eto, neurolinguistic eye movement can also be an indicator of deception. Yan ay base sa science dati. It is not 100% sure. Once the interviewer has determined the normal responses to questions, he or she may be able to evaluate the truthfulness of a subject's response based on eye movement. Sa subject ninyo na lie detection, yun nga, nabanggit ko din last meeting. Pag tumingin ka sa part na to, sa taas, sa kaliwa, may ibig sabihin yun. Pag tumingin ka sa left, sa gitna, or sa baba, may iba din ibig sabihin yun. So this concept is based on a belief that most people move their eyes in a certain direction when recalling or creating information. Kapag ina-access mo yung memory mo, may pinupuntahan talaga yung mata, may tinitignan siyang side or part. At kapag gumagawa lang ng kwento, kapag nag-iimbento siya ng kwento, may ibang part din daw na tinitignan yung, tumitingin yung mata. For example, if a subject is asked to recall the color of the shirt they wore the day before, their eyes would move up and to their left while they retrieve their memory. Up to the left daw, may inaalala ka. Kaya kung up to the right, gumagawa ka ng kwento. Recalling and creating sound memories are associated with eye movements directly left or right. Looking down and to the right is associated with creating tactile memories. And looking down and to the left is associated with internal dialogues, kinakausap mo yung sarili mo, or getting in touch with one's feelings. Of course, more of this will be discussed doon na sa subject ninyo. There are also verbal indicators of deception that interviewers must interpret. This may or may not be accompanied by an observable behavior. The most telling verbal indicators are when the words do not match the physical behaviors that accompany them. For example, the subject says no, but shakes his or her head in a yes gesture. Sinabi niya no, pero hindi match sa kilos niya. Yun, kailangan mong i-check yung mga ganong bagay. So following are some verbal indicators of dishonesty. So skipping around in sentences, stopping sentences or leaving off the end, inappropriate laughter, starting to speak in the third person, telling the interviewer that they have done things similar to the things currently under investigation that is wrong in the past. Repeating the interviewer's question. Yan, yung mga estudyante, pag tinanong, what is the meaning of deception? Ma'am, ano po ulit? Ma'am, meaning po ng deception? Yan. Asking, yung para bang yung estudyante, pinaulit niya pa yung tanong, tapos wala naman siyang sagot, pinagod niya lang yung teacher niya. Huwag tularan. Asking the interviewer to repeat the question. Asking the interviewer, are you accusing me? Naaktuan mo ba ako? Actually, oo. Sabihin mo ganun. Giving very short answers. Overgeneralizations. Any, all, never, always. Parang, I have never lied in my life. Buong buhay ko, never pa akong nagsinungaling. That's overgeneralization because at least once in your life, siguro nakapagsinungaling ka na. Bakit lahat naman po ng kaklase ko, mga pasaway din po eh. Talagang lahat. Lahat talaga, sin walang exception. Yan, overgeneralization. And then saying, I can't recall. So these are verbal indicators of dishonesty. Baka nagsisinungaling siya or may tinatago siya. The following phrases are usually indicators that the subject is going to finish the sentence with a lie. So kapag binanggit na tong mga to, alam mo yung kasunod, kasinungalingan yun. I swear on the Bible that I didn't. To tell you the truth. Sa totoo lang, sir. Yun. Yung sunod na sasabihin, kasinungalingan. To the best of my knowledge. Sa pagkakaalam ko po talaga. You may not believe this, but baka di po kayo maniwala, pero ganito po kasi yan, sir. I know that this sounds strange, but di kasinungalingan din yung kasunod nun. Overcoming resistance. So identifying the subject's dishonesty is an important part of the interrogation. However, the interviewer must be able to convince the subject to confess. Most interviewers use stories and rationalizations to move the subject closer to a confession. The stories are intended to convince the subject that he or she is not the first person to find themselves in their situation, and that the first step to feeling better about the situation is to tell the truth. Kumbaga, sasabihin mo na lang sa kanya na mas mapapadali ang buhay niya kapag sinabi niya na lang ang totoo. The stories that interviewers use may be real experiences or fabricated. Rationalizations are another important part of convincing a subject to confess. The interviewer presents possible reasons for the subject to have committed the crime. Yung bibigyan mo na nga siya ng option, di ba? Nangyari lang naman to dahil aksidente. Nandilim lang kasi paningin mo nun eh. Kahit ako magagalit ako ng ganyan. Magdadrama yung interrogator na gano'n. Rationalization yun. Binibigyan niya ng dahilan kung bakit nagawa yung krimen. Presenting these rationalizations allows the subject to give a face-saving reply as to why they committed the crime. Nabanggit din natin yan para mag-save face siya. Finally, interviewers will often minimize the severity of the crime. This can be accomplished by softening the language used during the interview. In that way, murder becomes hurt, theft becomes stake. Para hindi masyadong mabigat yung dating, you committed murder. No, hindi ganun ang gagawin mo. Papagaanin mo siya. Siguro kaya mo lang siya nasaktan kasi galit ka. Pero yung totoo, pinatay mo. Ganun. It is much easier for a subject to say that they borrowed a car without permission than to confess carjacking. And then, submission, a large part of the interrogation will involve the interviewer offering these rationalizations and stories combined with minimizing the subject's actions. The investigator has to find a theme that the subject can relate to. Ito na naman yung binabanggit natin theme sa past lessons natin, di ba? Once that has happened, the subject's behavior will change. The subject will enter submission and be ready to confess. Kumbaga, nag-submit na siya, sumuko na siya. Some signs of submissions are less forceful denials or lack of denials. Wala na siyang deny or hindi na masyadong madiin yung pagde-deny niya. Slumped posture, eyes looking down, teary eyes or crying and letting out a sigh. Nagbubuntong hininga na. At this point, when the interviewer again makes an accusation, the subject should accept it and acknowledge his or her guilt. This acknowledgement may be just a small nod or yes. Pag nakuha mo na yun, tumango siya o kaya sir, yun na yun. The investigator should try to keep the subject talking about the crime to prevent them from recanting. Kumbaga, tuloy-tuloy pa rin yung pagtatanong mo. Tuloy-tuloy pa rin yung pag-i-interrogate mo para patiyak mo na hindi niya babawiin yung mga sinabi niya. And lastly, is concluding the interview. Once the subject has voiced the first admission, it may seem as if the interview is nearing the end. That is not necessarily the case. After the subject has admitted their involvement, the interviewer must develop that admission into a confession. Kumbaga, tutulungan mo siya na ma-translate na yung pag-amin niya into a confession. And finally, into a statement that is admissible in